Well, let's go ahead and get started then. Hey, everyone, and welcome. I'm Devin Grace, and I'm the Director of Analytics and Finance here at IVET 360. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, Unlocking DVM Compliance, what it is, why it matters, and how to track it. Before we get into things, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar will take about 50 minutes with real-world examples, data insights, and actionable strategies you can start using right away. Today, I'm joined by Pierce Millar, our Senior Analytics Manager, who will be our moderator today. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar as well, so please use the chat functionality of Zoom to ask your questions. You can ask them in the chat at any time, and we'll be able to get to them at the end of the session. And a quick side note, your mics are currently on mute so that everyone may have an enjoyable webinar. I also ask that you please turn off your video, if you do turn it on, for the presentation. And with that, I'm thrilled you could join us today. Let's go ahead and get started. Slides to go. There we go. All right, kicking things off, I'm hoping to spark your interest in what we're about to explore. If you're like the practices we're talking with on a monthly basis, you're seeing increases in client price sensitivity, an uptick in your team tapping into alternative payment options to land that yes for the care you want to deliver, as well as an increase in clients who are waiting longer to get the care their pet needs. In some cases, missing the well visit and coming in later as a sick pet visit. While I do believe alternative payment options and marketing offers are key tools in today's price sensitive and economic hesitant landscape, there is an area that is within each practice's sphere of influence that too often gets overlooked, and when used in conjunction with alternative payment options and effective marketing strategies, will really drive stability and growth opportunities. So here's my sales pitch to grab your attention. What if you had data and the appropriate analysis tools to help you drive 3 to 5% revenue growth, perhaps even more, improve pet population health, expand DVM and staff work satisfaction, improve client satisfaction, and increase your long term valuation for your practice? All while not having to make it all about client or transaction volume. Client volume will always play a role, but this is about care consistency across your teams and getting more yeses from your clients for the care you want to deliver. Here at IVET 360, we believe it's imperative to focus on data-driven analysis of just that area. We label it DVM compliance. So what is compliance? Compliance, as we are interpreting it for this webinar, is not only getting a client to say yes, it's also our DVMs asking for the care on behalf of the pet where they feel it's needed. How we do that centers around several factors from team messaging consistency, DVM confidence, word choice or presentation approach, and sometimes a little help from having alternative payment tools where there's a strong client desire for care with some economic hardship. Essentially, what we're getting at is a focus on client education centered on a clearly presented why from staff that are confident in the care they are seeking to deliver. Will that work 100% of the time? No. But it will get you more yeses. And that's the end goal of what we are hoping for you to take away from today's session. This may sound like a promise too good to be true or too complex to really get a good pulse on, but within your practice's data are variations in compliance across your team and opportunities to be explored and gained when compared to other practices. We all want our clients to say yes to the care we want to provide to their pets, but how exactly are we doing that? Can we measure that? If so, how do we compare to others on our team? What about other practices? As we like to say on the analytics team, if you can measure it, you can improve it. We do so through understanding the why under the data and tracking it to see if our improvement efforts are effective or need a change in approach. So what is this great data analysis tool? Now, how do we even start to realize the what ifs of improved compliance? First, we need some data. In our experience, the tool for the job is what we at IVET 360 call exam ratio, simply defined as the number of codes in a specific group divided by the number of exams. Use this for looking at key areas of a practice's services that should happen consistently at a general practice level of exams. These include services or code groups, as I called them earlier, such as wellness labs, fecal labs, x rays, ultrasounds, and dental prophies. You can, of course, look at other metrics, but you're likely to get into being limited to comparing across your own team versus outside data analysis, which is totally okay if it's an important area to you and your practice. Now, those of you who may be ER or specialty hospitals, you may want to use the same type of analysis, but you'll need to get a little bit more creative to use the code group as a ratio of exams or perhaps some other key service that happens within your practice that can be leveraged to track compliance trends. For today's presentation, we'll be focused on GP focused examples. At IVET 360, we help our practices automate this data analysis tool and serve it up in our portal. And that's what you see on the slide up here. We will go through the key areas of this tool later in the webinar, but for now I wanted to show you what the end analysis product can look like. Now, just knowing that there is something unique in an analysis is not always motivation enough to do something about it. You all are being pulled in multiple directions every day, and you're navigating a landscape of shifting priorities, making it tough to effectively assess and know if something's really going to make a difference in your practice or for your clients and their pets, and therefore be worth your limited time. Put another way, we need to answer, why do we care about this? We approach this by taking data and using it to help us answer, what is the opportunity value for the practice? Be it revenue, profits for investment, improved care consistency. What about opportunities for the individual DVMs? Does it feel tangible to do the things that will drive healthier pet population from an increase in wellness services compliance? The IVET 360 analytics team understands it's a balancing act, which is why we have also established a tool to help us understand the potential impact of efforts to drive improvements in DVM compliance. Screenshot here is a new calculator tool that we at IVET 360 use to help quantify the value of improving compliance for the practice, individual DVMs, and to help identify the number of additional pets we can potentially help with each service. This is a real life example that's up here with a potential increase, you can see down here at the bottom area, of 10.4% revenue boost and a 17.4% EBITDA increase that's on the table for the practice. In this case, you can see the opportunity benefits can exceed the 3 to 5% that I mentioned earlier. It's all about where you are and where you believe you can get. We'll get into the details of this tool later in today's session. Now, in my opinion, what really matters in our why behind all of this is helping more pets. Now, hopefully I've piqued your interest a bit. I'm going to cover in today's webinar about DVM compliance and exam ratio analysis. First, we're going to get technical. Not everyone's into data like our IVET 360 analytics team is, but we're going to leverage data. It's important to know what, where, and how to get it. Second, we're going to take a look at how to review the data, identifying trends, where to get averages, share some benchmarks, and talk about how to establish the potential value. Now, just getting data and looking at it is important, but what we do with it is what really makes a difference. So we're also going to touch on how to turn that data into action, and then how to secure results and reinforce actions to realize long-term benefits. It's a lot to cover, so let's get going. Now, before we do that, and this is my least favorite part, which is why it's slide 7, but it's probably important to know who's this person talking to you about all this. As I mentioned at the start, my name's Devin Grace, and I'm the Director of Finance and Analytics here at IVET 360. I've been with IVET 360 almost from the very beginning, about 11 years now. In my role, I've been focused on helping drive our data-driven approach and the various analysis tools that help our clients drive practice level and individual DVM success through helping more pets. I came to IVET 360 with experience across multiple industries, but with a focus on data analysis, budgeting, and operational efficiency. In my career adventures, I've come to realize for a lot of people that data can be boring or is even a catalyst for some anxiety and therefore gets avoided, despite its immense value. Some of my clients will tell you I try to bring a little fun to the table as well. So if you happen to find any little Easter eggs in my presentation, I hope they give you a little smirk. Of course, this is a presentation, so if any of my clients are on here, you will hear a little more presentation voice from me today. First, on our agenda map, we're going to learn about the data we need to make this analysis happen. This is where you will either be a data analysis comfortable person or want to identify someone in your organization to be your data puller, data organizer, data cleaner, and data summarizer. Here at IVET 360, that person is your IVET 360 Analytics Manager and our deep set of data analysis tools combined with best practice recommendations. As the slide says, this is where I want to warn you, we will be getting a little technical. So spreadsheet terrified individuals should be prepared to be strong for this section. Ooh, spreadsheets. Sorry, one of you was thinking it. Luckily, we have a team of analytics managers who live every day in them to provide and ensure good data and guide the analysis and insights conversations so you don't have to. As with any valuable analysis, we need to start with identifying what data we need to answer a question or track a trend. In this case, we need code counts or quantities. Difference being code counts are instances of a code, and quantity is the count of an inventory item that occurs as a result of a code. In most cases, code count will be fine, as one lab code means that one lab happened. The need to go to quantity comes from an inventory item where one code of a 6-pack of Trio is 6 doses, or a quantity of 6. Code counts are key to break the data down into what will be a count of exam codes and a count of codes in the groups we will use to calculate and analyze as a ratio of exams. We also want code numbers, but it's also good to give yourself some plain English things in the data. So I recommend what your PIM system may call code description or something similar. I don't know about you, but I'm not memorizing several thousand codes and what they are. Give me the human friendly name, please. Now, we may want to be able to look at our data by month, provider, and perhaps year over year. So we'll also want to include those data points as well. On this slide is an example of what that data set may look like. This spreadsheet, or a data export, is the underpinnings of what we will use for our analysis. Again, if this is scary, hopefully you have a data comfortable individual in your practice to help you build this out, or you have or are interested in getting an IVET 360 Analytics Manager to support you. Now we know what data to get, but where do we get it? If you're doing this on your own, it will most likely come from your practice management system or PIMS. This may be from one report or a combination of reports. If you're doing this on your own and you're not the biggest fan of data analysis, this is likely going to be a stressful part, and I recommend working with your PIM support to establish the needed reports. Now, if you have a data IT expert and they have some good database query skills, they can likely generate a database query to pull this type of data. They just need to know what data points to get. Or you can ask your IVET 360 Analytics Manager to do it all for you. No matter your chosen source, you will need to take the data, organize it and clean it, and put it into a usable format. I recommend a spreadsheet and to have the data points organized into columns similar to the example on this slide. Now, with any data set, you're going to have to do some cleanup. Nope, not with Windex. What I mean is there are always things like same provider but different name, codes to combine into a group, codes to leave out. Now, I'm not going to get into what to do with combining data sets or complex cleanup needs. You didn't come here today for an Excel class, and I'm not here to put you all to sleep. And for the sake of time, I have to keep this high level. That in mind, for a data set similar to the one I showed in the previous slide, there'll be two things you need to do to make the data useful. First is common names for your DVMs. In our example here, you can see that there's a Dr. K9 and a Dr. Kathy 9. In our case, those are the same provider. We're wanting them to be combined in our data analysis. So leveraging what I call a helper column to do that. Mapping table here is what we will use to make those two provider labels the same in the data. You'll need Excel skills or someone with Excel skills to do that. In short, you'll be adding a column on your original report that leverages this provider name table to report back to the helper column the consistent DVM name you want to use. This can be a VLOOKUP or an XLOOKUP. Now, if that sounds like a foreign language to you, this is where you delegate to your in-house data expert or an IVET 360 Analytics Manager. Another thing to note that there are some of you that may have support staff in the provider's list of names as well. These are typically not fair to compare in a DVM compliance focused analysis, so typically I'll bucket them into a staff provider name, and this makes it so if I want to look at them, I can, but usually I'm not going to do so. Now you'll need to combine codes into groups as well. Likely you want to do, you don't, well, excuse me, you likely do not have just one wellness lab panel or one x-ray code. We're wanting to analyze them in a group. Example above here is dental prophy codes. This practice has two codes, and we're going to do the same helper column approach to make them both have a column with a common name for the dental prophy code group. In this here, we can see we've named them both dental prophy. Now there'll be codes that you also want to consider to combine. Example of this is wellness lab panels that include a fecal lab in them. They count for both groups, fecal labs and the wellness lab panel group. Your analysis will need to include them in both. You can solve this by allowing mapping to more than one group or code group that you can include in a totaled up version. This will likely require a little bit more flexing on the Excel skills to do it. There will also be codes to leave out as well. These include health certificate exams, tech exams, pre-surgical exams, and labs you really use as sick, but some DVMs may use for, well, to offer a price break to a client. You can still include them, but align the analysis to the behaviors you want, not just to echo the way they are. Now, if your eyes have glossed over at this, I get it. It's technical. Good news here is there are people who love this stuff, and they don't have to be you. You just need to have them on your team, either as staff, an outside contractor, or IVET 360 Analytics. Now we need to calculate from that data. In short, getting to account of exam codes and account of codes in the group we are looking to measure. In this case, fecal labs and dental prophies. Once we have those two number counts, we can divide them together. In our first example here, that's 5 dental prophy codes divided by 100 exam codes for Dr. John Picard, coming to a 5% exam ratio for that doctor's dental prophies. Yes, it's math, but hopefully we've now taken the complex and brought it down to a simple and easy to calculate metric. What's great about this metric is not just the simple math of it, but that it's applicable to part-time, full-time, relief, basically any schedule you can think of. If your DVMs are saying and doing everything the same, but their schedules are different, the results should be relatively similar with this metric. Basically, we're taking the she works more than me argument off the table, so we can think of this as a normalizing metric for the data. Now, this example is only a snapshot in time. What about looking at it over months and year over year, and by each provider compared to each other? Well, that's where we have to add complexity back into the data and leverage those data points of provider, month, and year we included back in our original data source. Good news is we will still use the same basic math equation, just doing it multiple times to create analyzable data that ideally can end up as an easy to view graph or comparison table. In this slide are two examples of those graphs. Now that we've established the data and ideally are populating it into graphs, we need to explore what it should look like, what to look for, how to compare, and what to gain from it. first stop is the team trends. In essence, what is the trend of the exam as ratio of exams for the team as a whole? The example here has three key components, which we'll go through to understand what and why of each. First section is a graph of the DVM team compliance trends over time. In this case, a trailing 12-month view. This is the number of exam or number of X-ray codes divided by the number of exam codes for the full DVM team for each month over 12 months. Also includes a line for the trailing 12-month average designated by the purple dotted line. Now, why do we care about this? Using this data, we can identify shifts in compliance trends at the team level. And the trailing 12-month average line allows us to see if a shift is taking us above or below our general average in any significance. This helps us identify where we might want to understand a change we are seeing. Now, to identify where or who to gather additional insights from, we're going to need more data. We'll get into that. Next two sections here are the provider team's trailing 12-month ratios and the codes included in the data set. In this case, radiology codes for X-ray compliance. The provider ratios allow us to see how the individual DVMs compare at a full 12-month level to each other. We can ask questions like, who's the strongest in compliance? Who might need more support, simply by looking at where the DVMs fall compared to each other in this graph. Code data is there to help provide transparency on what we're using to measure and ensure nothing is missing or included incorrectly in the group. Now that we have a basic lay of the land for the graphs and data here, what are some things we can do with it? One can be to look at a single DVM's data. So let's say we select, DVM 0 is selected on this slide. Now let's do the same thing we did with the last chart and dissect what we're looking at. Here we're looking at a trend line of the individual DVM's compliance trend compared to the teams. This graph can be useful as we can see how a DVM compares to the practice team as a whole, as well as to identify if the individual DVMs are improving compared to the team or not. This layer allows us to identify where or who to gather additional insights from or to influence, or to understand if our influence efforts are driving positive change, either for the individual or as a whole. In this case, we see a DVM receive some support after a rough May and is seeing improvements in their dental cleaning compliance. These are the same two sections we saw before, but this time I'm only going to focus on the bottom left graph, as we already know why the code list is there. This section shows us where that DVM falls on the team at a 12-month average level. In this case, second from the bottom. Good news is they're improving recently, as we saw on the previous slide of the graph. So we should start to expect them to move up the list, or at least that their overall average starts to move up more in line with the top performers. Putting the two together, we can see where a DVM falls in comparison to the team, and when merged with the timing of any support efforts, we can see if those efforts are being effective, as well as to see they're not only improving for one specific DVM, but for the overall practice metric as well. When we look at this area through a more team-focused lens, we're going to look for where someone is inconsistent with the team. This allows us to identify who to learn from and who could use some support. In IVET 360's reporting case on this slide, we will also want to click on the provider information to show that provider's trend line. Excuse me. Here we'll see some examples of the trend line versus the DVM team trends and the practice's trailing 12-month average. In the top case, we see where a DVM had a pretty strong dip in May. This DVM was running in line with the team average, but in May is where they had some struggles with compliance. The good news here is that the DVM was able to get some support, and as we see in the graph, the new trend is now above the team average and above their own past trends. Bottom graph, we see a DVM who's generally above the team average. We could consider them a top performer in the practice on the specific area. We see in December they had a little dip. This could be PTO, and in this case was likely written off as such because we knew the DVM was on PTO and the lower trend did not continue. However, we go forward to August and we see a dip again. This time we know the provider was not on PTO. So this signals a time to check in on the specific area. In this case, dental prophy recommendations and compliance. So far, we've looked at this data from a compared to self, compared to practice, and compared to teammates. What about the industry? And are there benchmarks to keep in mind? Good news is we've been looking at this data for several years now with our clients, and we have made it available in our annual report, the Veterinary Industry Benchmark Report. This report's where you can find averages and see some seasonal trends by code group. Feel free to use the link to download the report. You'll find graphs like the one on the slide toward the end of the report, about slide 24. As you can see in the graph here, we have wellness lab exam ratio trends. This shows how the general ratio in 2024 was about the same as 2023, with some slowing mid-year, but increased at the end of the year over the prior year. In this graph, there's a consistent seasonal trend where compliance is higher by a few percent at the start of the year and tapers off towards the end. Now, you may expect to see the same in your own practice, but working to influence the latter part of the year's lag could provide some good opportunity value to the practice and team, as well as help a few more pets. And what about benchmarks? Most of us want to know, what should I be comparing my results to? To know if my team and I are doing something unique, basically want to know, is my unique driving better results than others or not? In most cases, benchmarks are a useful tool to provide that comparison. But keep in mind that benchmarks are not always the best place to compare yourself. Sometimes there'll be uniqueness in your own practice or a specific area due to your chosen medical approaches, practice culture, or special internal processes. Keep these in mind as you compare to benchmark, or just to compare internally to your past and across the DVM team. My recommendation is to use your understanding of your uniqueness to establish your lens from which to interpret the data. Now that you've interpreted your own uniquenesses for your practice and made notes for your interpretive lens for which to leverage the benchmarks, what are the benchmarks? Keeping in mind that these are primarily for GB practices. So for wellness labs, or early detection panels as I would recommend you term them these days, we expect to see 20% exam ratio or higher. Our top practices can see results of upwards of 40%, depending on their approach for wellness. Again, that's where we're applying that lens. Fecal labs, we expect to be at 30% or above. Keep in mind, this should also include fecal wellness lab combo codes. Next on the list is imaging. Now, as we get into imaging, this is where we can see some trade-offs between radiology and ultrasounds. So sometimes you may want to look at these as a combined metric if your medical approach leverages these imaging treatments differently than the majority. In most cases, we anticipate radiographs to have an exam ratio of about 10 to 15%. We do see that practices with ortho services will see ratios above this range. You're going to be taking a lot more pictures of bones. For ultrasounds, this tends to be lower at around 2%. However, as I mentioned, it can be higher if your team leverages ultrasounds for certain cases where others have tended to use radiographs. Now, I'm not medically qualified to tell you what is the best approach, so this is where you all have to decide as a DVM team. Now, for dental prophies, we expect to see 5% or above. For rechecks, we include these here as well, but instead of looking at them from a threshold to be at or above, we look at it to be as a threshold to be under. In this case, 30%. The reason for this is that if we see a practice going heavy on recheck exams, they tend to reach a point somewhere around 30% that the practice's average transaction charge begins to crash. This is in part due to the balancing act that goes on around rechecks. What I mean by that is we are here to help more pets, and there are things that should have a recheck. However, at some point, we start to block our capacity to help more pets above the care benefit that a recheck is providing. Again, this gets into the medical protocols that you will need to decide are best for your own practice. But in general, we see that under 30% is where the overall metric for a practice's financial health remains stable. Average for reference is under 15%. But keep in mind the higher procedure volume you do, the more rechecks you are likely to see because there's a higher medical need and a best practice in doing so. Now you should have some idea of how to compare to industry benchmarks for general practice. And please do take to heart my warning that with any benchmarks or data in general, to make an effort to understand the lens you need to apply to it for correct interpretation. We've now reviewed data from multiple angles. We've established a place to go for averages, and I've shared some benchmarks. Next part of reviewing the data that can be helpful is understanding the value of the efforts for the practice, an individual DVM, or for the additional pets that we can help. Basically providing you with some analysis to answer for the business owner mindset, is this worth my time and effort? Now here at IVIT 360, we do this for our clients with what you see on the slide here. This is a new calculation tool that leverages the exam ratio data, targets, and your current pricing and costs to establish the benefits for the practice. And if you also want, down to the DVM level over here. What are we looking at here to drive this calculator? Well, first in the upper left-hand corner here, we have how many exams for trailing 12 months, and we also have an average per month. We're going to set a target. What is our target? Do we use benchmarks or do we establish our own? Now, if it's a daunting gap between where you are and where you want to be, incremental goals are going to be your friend. If you're above a benchmark, you can probably still improve, so go above and beyond in your goal. It might not be too much of a gap. We also need to establish where are we as a team, and that's the current TTM average ratio here. We also then want to calculate how many more of each area do we need to do to reach our goal. That's this gray box here. And then we want to quantify the average profit per additional pet helped. So we're going to take our average price and our average cost to come up with the estimated average profit. In this case, we're using weighted average for the codes in the group based on a trailing 12-month volumes for each code included in the group. This is where it gets a little technical with the math. Then we want to annualize that benefit. So now I've got the numbers again of just how many we have to do. What's that mean monthly? And then we're annualizing that. Eventually just timesing the month by 12. And then if we're getting into discussions with the DVMs, we want to establish a per DVM or specific DVM benefit. We want to figure out, well, what's the percent that this doctor does and how do we pay them? It's a production percentage, so we can plug that in here to calculate what's the benefit per month and the annualized benefit. Now this is the benefit to that specific doctor. So we can see that it has dollar signs in it. Not every doctor likes dollar signs. So in certain cases, we really want to focus on how many more pets do I have to help? Want to help. This can also be used then to ask, are these tangible? Meaning, do I think that asking for 5 more wellness labs in a month or changing something to try to get 5 more wellness panels, is that tangible? If it is, great. If not, we'll probably want to go and adjust what we want to do for our target. There we go. And then for the business owner level mindset, what's the top line revenue and EBITDA benefit to the practice of putting in the effort to meet these targets? As I mentioned in the intro, in this example is a potential increase of 10.4% of revenue, and a 17.4% increase to EBITDA that's on the table for our client here. Now, even if we were to only get halfway to our goal in this example, it's still a $250,000 plus boost to the top line and a $100,000 boost to EBITDA profits. Your own data will, of course, be different. Could be less, could be more. But there's so much potential here, financially, pet health and care wise, and culturally for our teams. Now we have a view of the opportunity on the table, but how do we get it? Now we've gotten through the data part. Now comes the people part. We can project benefits and set goals that feel tangible, but the true test comes in turning that data into action. Now, here at Vivet 360, our analytics managers are here to help you interpret the data and decide the actions. But if you're feeling you need even more support in how to have the conversations that will support success from these kinds of analyses, we also offer HR services. I am by no means an expert in HR, but I can give you some high level things to think about to help you turn your exam ratio data into action. So, in this section, we're going to touch on identifying the what, why, and how from the data. We'll touch on how to gain team buy in, collaborating to identify action, and then implementing and tracking results. Of course, with this bullet, I feel compelled to offer a few words of wisdom. When you make changes, keep tinkering. Do not let yourself fall back into old habits. Old habits will only give you old results. Let's get into the what, why, and how. What are we doing with the data that will be important? We're going to identify areas of opportunity within the code group, identify the individuals with strong results in the data, and identify any individuals who have opportunity to improve. Why do we want to do something about it? Are we going to be helping more pets with better care? Is there an attractive financial benefit, be it for the practice or an individual? And how are we going to influence? Do this by asking questions about the data and researching why it's that way. This takes us to asking questions to the team to gather insights and understand administrative impacts or side effects. In the end, the data tells us where to ask questions. Communication provides us the why and the how. In essence, we end up at a fact finding discussion and mission guided by data analysis. As I'm sure all of you have experienced with anything you want to influence or change, you need team buy in. The goal of the fact finding in this phase of the process is to help you align the team in agreeing that there is an opportunity, gaining their valuable insights on why it's there, adjusting for clear goals and expectations. Now, this allows the managers to see and address where gaps are found in the team, and allowing the team to provide input into the solution. Want to be aligning the team and allowing them to be a part of the solution. This gives them a voice to feel heard, which in turn provides a stronger tie to support the end solution. Of course, a key part of this is also helping the team understand what is the measuring stick to judge success and their part in how to influence it. Here's a quick abbreviated example of this. What? What or who do we want to influence? Why? Why is it worth influencing? And then how? How do we want to go about making it better? That can be looking at creating consistency across the team, identifying where there are training opportunities to drive that consistency, understanding the administrative processes that may be impacting your data, understanding your care protocols or the need to establish some so that you can drive consistency, and then learning from your top performers. It can be one of those things, or all of them, or a combination. Now, here's a sample example. In our graph, practice x rays are down as a ratio of exams. That's the black line there. We have several DVMs mentioning increased price sensitivity from clients, but Dr. Janeway is not seeing this in her data. Fact finding, we might want to ask, what is Dr. Janeway saying in her recommendations? How does she say it? What does her support team do? Are there specific words that she says, or is it the confidence that comes behind how she says what she says? There can be a great many things here to explore. Then we get into the why. Why do we want to do this? In this case, probably helping more pets. And that'll help grow staff effectiveness of care and improve pet health. Increases to we'll also get to see some increases to revenue and operational profit for future practice investment. Then how? First, we'll probably want to understand any administrative drivers such as scheduling or support team structure or training gaps that may be influencing the trends. For these, I recommend you call the elephant out in the room before someone else points it out. Don't let discussions get derailed because someone wants to blame it all on process or scheduling. Know that beforehand. We'll also probably want to take some steps and review with Dr. Janeway, looking at her data, understanding her approach, and what are her talking points. Want to gather some insight from the support staff. Do those things align with what the DVM says about their approach? And then have a DVM meeting to discuss, in this case, x ray compliance. What's working? What's not? What do we agree on? When should we be recommending them? And then you're up for it, ask Dr. Janeway to do some role playing on her approach and presentation in a doctor's meeting. Have those doctors, look at what they like about her approach, tone, words, etc. This is important because if you ask a DVM what they do differently, you're probably going to hear, I just do what I always do. But individuals observing can identify differences from their own approach, and that's where you can gain valuable insights. What we have to identify is what is different and identify what each DVM will try and tinker with to help get more yeses when recommending x rays in this case. And don't forget to set a target. We all know what we're trying to hit. This can be an increase of exam ratio going forward that the team feels is tangible. In our case here, that target is 2 more x rays per month for DVM. Now that the team has established a plan and a goal, it's important to keep leveraging the data to track the results. Where you see success, remember to cheer it on. The behaviors you feed are the behaviors that grow. And where you see opportunity, work together to troubleshoot and support those team members through the challenges. This is not a rotisserie chicken where you can set it and forget it. See the second graph on what happens when we talk about it and don't reinforce it. The approach that works for one may run into hurdles with another. Work through them and reinforce the team support environment. You'll get better feedback and can address challenges faster if you feed this idea of openness and collaboration around pain points and bumps in the road. We're all human beings and challenges will happen. Now that we've taken action and are working towards realizing our benefits, we also want to keep them going. This requires all the big HR and leadership talking points you probably heard at length. First, follow up. Have regular touch points with your team as you implement changes. This allows you to hear about issues faster and identify what's working well quickly. For success, reinforce that action with celebration of that success. Talk through the numbers that are meaningful to that specific individual or team. Show them how they're doing and where their efforts are driving improvements in the data. And for challenges or changes in the data, adapt. Bring the team back together to adjust plans. Yes, you'll want to repeat the process. And I say repeat the process because what this whole process looks like is this, a circular process. Data analysis are key parts of it, but you have to turn them into action and adjust as you go to not only realize the benefits of improving DVM compliance, but to secure them for the longer term. And it's always good to remind ourselves why we keep the fight going to make this a reality in our practice. Because it is hard, and the landscape's always moving. Today's all star can stumble tomorrow, and what clients react to today may not be the same the next day, month, or year. Good data and a collaborative and solutions focused team can help making and navigating the road ahead easier. Of course, having the data to understand where you are versus where you want to be is key to having those efforts be productive. But nothing happens without the efforts you put in. Your efforts to drive improvement here in DVM compliance will not only provide financial benefits to the practice and the DVMs, but will also drive improvements in pet population health. And that feeds to the happiness fuel for why most of your team is probably in veterinary medicine to help more pets get the care you see they need. Before we wrap up and open to questions, I want to invite you to the next webinar, Loyalty That Lasts, Turning First Visits into Lifelong Clients. This session will be hosted by Noelle Spare, one of our wonderful marketing managers. Noelle will explore loyalty programs, proactive communication, forward booking, and reminders, and talk about how to set those up, track, and succeed at each of them. The webinar will be on Wednesday, October 29th at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern, and we hope to see you there. And that's it from me. Thank you all for hanging in there with me today and learning how to drive improvements in DVM compliance through exam ratio analysis and the supporting actions to realize benefits from the opportunities on the table. Now I'd love to hear from you. Pierce, do we have any questions in the chat?
Yeah. Someone was wondering, is it possible to get a copy of this video?
I believe so. So if you signed up for the webinar, there will be a recording of it and we can get you out a link. Any other questions, Pierce?
Yeah, on the technical side, as far as exams, thinking about the denominator, should we be, because you mentioned not including tech exams, should they be including things like same day and ER exams in the denominator?
For the analysis as we have it set up across our practices, yes, is the short answer. The reason for that is not all practices break things out into well or sick or well and ER and so on and so forth. So if you want to compare to benchmarks, you're going to want to include those in there because we do have them in our data overall.
Perfect. Also, a lot of the times I know we see practices have a specific DVM who, let's say, loves to do the dental prophies, for example. How does that change this data and how you look at it?
So you're probably going to see, well, first of all, let me start with this. We definitely have people who have this structure. I call them the chief dentists in the data. What we will see is that you'll have a provider. So, for example, going back to the graph where you have the little bar chart there, you're going to see one provider massively exceed the 5% benchmark there. They might be at 13 or 15% overall. Now, when you go look at it at the whole practice level, because you have other doctors also doing exams, that's probably going to come back down to around that 5% threshold overall. So you'll see some variations, but it's all driving from that one doctor, and the overall average still applies.
Okay, great. Last question I have, and then if anyone else has any further questions, please include them in the chat. Do you have any, have you seen improvements through incentivizing the staff team, the support staff team, not just the doctors? And, if so, with any anecdotal evidence, do you necessarily recommend to have those incentives for support staff?
So support staff will typically play a key role in a lot of this because you want to have a consistent message across the board. Whether or not you choose to do incentives is really up to you. I'm a little bit of an old school mentality of if it's part of their job, should I really be incentivizing it? So that can be something to consider. Now, in certain cases, we do have practices who are saying, yeah, let's do a little thing around fecals. Support staff's going to have probably a higher role in making sure we get that fecal sample. And so they might do something like have a little fun game of who can get the most, and have some sort of prize or benefit for that at the end of it. So that's something you could definitely consider as well. Any other questions, Piers?
That's all I have.
Right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for coming, and we hope to see you on the next webinar. Have a great day.